All right, so I'm going to be making this video on Tuesday night, February 23rd, for the class that happened this morning. That was section AA, and also for the two classes on Wednesday and the class on Thursday. So just as a brief reminder of what we talked about last week with the reminder of the three orientations: product, sales, and marketing. Just think of it as this. Product is trying to sell something based on you describing what it physically looks like. Sales is you trying to sell something by talking about the price and the fact that your price is lower than somebody else's price. Marketing orientation is you trying to sell something based on actually talking to the person, finding out what their problem is, and then selling them a solution to the problem. So it's a conversation that fits. And the international business aspect of it is doing that internationally is a little bit more difficult because you have to take into account the social cultural environment and different languages and different ways that people interact with each other, and foods and lifestyles and distances and weather and geography and all those kinds of things that influence it. So the approach is going to be more complicated because you have to ask your questions in a different way to make sure you get the best answer to be able to sell them a product that they're actually interested in. All right, government influence on trade. Many aspects of that for Canadians or people doing business with Canada, because the Canadian government is involved in every aspect. And the reason why government gets involved in trade is because they want to be able to make sure that companies in Canada make money. When they make money, it means they can tax them. When they tax them, it means they get the revenue from the tax to be able to turn around and spend it on roads and hospitals and 911 and fire and ambulance and all those kinds of things. If you've lived in a country where the government doesn't get enough tax from companies because either the companies cheat or they squirrel away their money in different banking structures, then you know what the problem is, because people don't have confidence in the government to govern. So next election they vote for a different political party. So that's why politicians always want to make sure that business is good for companies, and they do everything that they can to be able to help them with all kinds of rules and regulations and interventions and subsidies and all kinds of things like that. We talked about Canada Border Services Agency. Most people just know about it as the people that check your passports when you come in or out of Canada, but it's a lot more than that. It looks at companies doing business in Canada and whether those prices are correct or whether the goods are described as such, and rules and regulations related to that. There's also a humorous video talking about crossing the border into Canada. All right, this is an interesting video because a student took the file from me and kind of pimped it up a little bit and added in some more graphics and sound and things like that. I'm going to do that more often when I download my Camtasias and give them to people in the class who want to volunteer to make it a little bit more fancy. And then we also talked about specific examples of how the government screws things up for business by sometimes making a regulation that makes it difficult. Like I talked about trying to sell the strawberry jam in Hong Kong, and I couldn't sell the cheap price because the Canadian law says that you can only sell grade A stuff. And I also told the story about raisins from Afghanistan and Pakistan being shipped to Europe through Turkey, and the regulation in Canada that they had too much lead in them, and so they didn't want to buy the raisins coming from Afghanistan. The problem is if the Afghan farmers can't sell their grapes in the form of raisins, then they're going to switch to something else like poppies. And it's no surprise that Afghanistan is one of the world's largest sources of heroin because of the poppies. Why? Because the farmers can't make any money selling raisins. We'll talk this week about foreign direct investment. Now this is where the cool stuff happens when people say to me, I want to work in international business. This is where you get on an airplane after COVID or before COVID, and you get to fly to some interesting place, and you get met by somebody from the company, and they pick you up at the airport and take you to a nice hotel. The next day you meet with a bunch of people and you get toured around some plant or facility. That's the international business that I want to bring to you and give you examples of how people do stuff like this. So the first thing I have to explain is what are the different aspects of the ways that companies get involved in international business. And we'll also talk about foreign direct investment in Canada, and also some things to do with sovereignty issues, and then country valuations. Now, what that means is when you decide to go to a different area like South America or to Asia or to Europe, you have to make a choice on different countries. You could say, well, we want to go into France, Germany, and Spain. But those are three different language groups, right? Or you might say, well, we want to go into South America. Are you going to go to Brazil? That's Portuguese. All the other countries, Spanish, except for Ghana and a couple other places that's also English. But the point I'm getting at is thinking about the country you're going into is not easy. So we're going to talk about that and give you some criteria as to how to make that selection. I also started this little indicators of economic supremacy. I thought to myself, how could I tell my students the best countries to do business with? What if I made a list and said, let's put all the countries here where people make airplanes? Wouldn't that be like the top most biggest thing. If you're a country that makes an airplane, like a Boeing 747, that means you totally got your economic shit together because you can sell the 747, right? Now, all these countries don't make big airplanes. Some of them just make airplane parts and just import airplanes, but generally speaking, they're planes. Then you've got trains. Now, trains is a big thing, not just for subways and for communication between cities, but also for transportation of freight long distances. That's the trade part of international trade. And then cars. That's another thing that we could identify. If a country is big enough and has a good enough economy that they make cars in that country, then that's a good indicator of a country that's got a good economy. For example, they don't make cars in Jamaica or in Bahamas or in Barbados or Trinidad. Those are great places to visit on vacation, but they don't have an economy big enough to make cars. And then phones is the other thing I wanted to add in. If you're a country that's big enough and has the technology to make devices of all kinds, then you're probably in the upper economic category. What are some of the countries that are in all four of these columns? Well, Canada for one, United States for another one, Japan, China, etc. So those are some indicators of where you want to expand, where a country's got a good enough economy. All right, let's just go back here. Then we'll also talk about the OECD as a great source of trade for international marketing research. We'll talk about the World Trade Organization, which makes rules and regulations. We'll talk about Forex exchange mark, money, and counter trade. This is interesting because not everywhere you want to go do business around the world can you pay for stuff with euros or with American dollars. Why? Because the people who you're selling to don't have American dollars to pay back. So we'll talk about counter trade. There's many interesting examples, like Saudi Arabia bought 10 747 jets from Russia, from Boeing, and they paid in crude oil. General Electric won a contract in Romania by taking Romanian products and turn around selling them at a profit in the countries that they do business with. Venezuela negotiated a contract with Caterpillar Construction Equipment to trade 350,000 tons of iron ore for Caterpillar earth moving equipment. There's many examples like that I wanted to tell you. Then we'll talk about the money side, the World Bank and the IMF, and I'll explain the difference between the two. And then probably the following week after this, not next class, we'll get into political risk and contingency planning. Of all the things that I teach you at Seneca, this right here is probably the most important because I get into personal risk and threat situations. You know, where to go to get the help from the Canadian Embassy. And when you travel around the world, what are some things you can do to protect yourself, like registering with the Canadian Embassy. So, yeah, that's me with my guys at the Jamaican Defense Force, where I was teaching last summer about risk and threat contingency and other things like that. So, this is a video here that summarizes the whole personal risk page, which you should look at. Talks about things that are not in any textbook, like registering with the Canadian Embassy, and also getting together your grab bag and other personal risk situations. So that's what we're going to do in class this week, plus a little bit of a preview on the personal risk stuff following when we get back from the break week. I hope this is interesting and useful.